Have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted deeply? Imagine being fired by an intern, someone you trained yourself and believed in their potential, and discovering that the pain of this betrayal goes beyond the professional, affecting your very identity. The story you are going to hear today is about this, about overcoming, forgiveness, and above all, the transformation that comes from difficult times. But what happened next, after the betrayal and the pain, will surprise you. If you are going through a difficult time, loss or disappointment, this story will show you how life can reinvent itself, how it is possible to get out of the depths of despair and discover strengths that you didn't even know you had. And, at the end of this journey, you will understand that, as challenging as it was, that moment of betrayal ended up becoming the biggest turning point in the protagonist's life. If this story resonated with you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Now, because we will continue together on this journey of reflection and transformation. I guarantee that, at the end, you will see life with different eyes. It was a normal day, but this one seemed to have a different meaning. I knew something was about to change, although I didn't know exactly what. The office was busy, my colleagues were going about their daily routines, but my gaze was fixed on the computer. I had just finished training Lucas, a new intern. He was hard-working, seemingly humble, and I believed he could be a great addition to the team. What I didn't imagine was that this young man, whom I had helped shape in the first few weeks, would have the power to change the course of my life, in a cruel and unexpected way, sitting in front of me. Lucas seemed comfortable, perhaps even more than I had imagined. He had already shown signs of competence, but at that moment, something seemed different. His eyes were restless, and he avoided eye contact, focused only on the computer screen. This disconcerted me a little, but I continued with my work, trying to ignore what was just a strange feeling. I never imagined that he would be the one to make the decision that, in the blink of an eye, would put me on a path of uncertainty. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was HR. They had asked me to come up there, and something told me that things weren't going well, but I didn't know exactly why. I was confident in my ability to always deliver good results. I had always been a good employee, someone who had helped the company grow. The question that kept running through my mind was, what could possibly go wrong now? I was about to discover that not everything that seemed right was, in fact, what I imagined. When I arrived at the HR office, the atmosphere was tense. It wasn't the first time I'd spoken to HR, but there was something that day that made me uncomfortable. The HR director, with a serious expression on her face, looked at me with regret, and before I could understand what was happening, she said to me, "Unfortunately, we have to terminate your contract." It was like a punch in the stomach. I knew things weren't perfect, but I never imagined that I would be fired. And worst of all, the decision was coming from someone I had helped grow until yesterday. The intern I had invested so much in teaching was now at the center of a turnaround I couldn't understand. The HR director's words echoed in my head like a distant echo. "We need to terminate your contract." Each syllable seemed to be pronounced more slowly, as if time had slowed down at that very moment. I felt the world around me spin more slowly, and a wave of disbelief engulfed me. How could this be happening? How could someone I had trained, someone I had helped to rise, now be at the center of such a devastating decision for me? I couldn't process it. It was as if the ground had opened up beneath my feet. As she explained the reason behind my dismissal, my mind was elsewhere, trying to piece together a situation that seemed surreal. The feeling of betrayal was consuming me. I had trusted Lucas, invested time and energy in helping him become someone better, more prepared. And now here he was, somehow responsible for this surefire blow to my career. There was no direct explanation as to how he had come to be in the position of replacing me, but the guilt seemed to rest on my shoulders. It was the feeling that somehow I had been responsible for opening the door to something that would destroy me. The director told me that the reason for the decision was not personal, but I knew deep down that it was impossible to separate things. If I had not trained Lucas, if I had not been the person who showed him the tools to move up, none of this would have happened. The most painful thing was realizing that no matter how hard I had tried to be fair, fate seemed to have played a cruel trick on me. There was something profound about all of this. How could someone so young get to this point? And how could I, now, deal with this loss? As I walked out of the room with the termination papers in hand, a feeling of helplessness and frustration took over me. It was not just about the dismissal itself, but the emotional weight of it all. Life seemed to be telling me something that I was not ready to hear. And with all of this, a question was forming. How could I move forward? How could I start over after being hit by a betrayal disguised as an opportunity? This made me reflect on the difficult moments in life where lessons come in unexpected and often painful ways. The first night after being fired was a whirlwind. The silence at home seemed deeper than ever. Sitting on the couch with the lights off, I tried to understand what had happened. What had I done wrong? Where had I gone wrong? The images of the day were blurry, as if my mind was trying to erase the most painful memories. The betrayal was embedded in my being, not in the way I imagined, but in the most subtle and disconcerting way. The betrayal of someone I had chosen to believe in, someone who seemed to need me, but who, in the end, not only used me as a springboard, but also threw me down from an unimaginable height. It is amazing how the pain of betrayal is different from other pains. There is nothing more bitter than feeling that someone you helped, someone you guided, decided to use your effort and good will against you. The word injustice was not strong enough to describe what I was feeling. What hurt the most was not the loss of my job itself, but the feeling that I had been replaced without even being asked, as if my contribution had been a disposable currency. There was a deep emptiness in my chest, a sadness that seemed to weigh more than I could bear. I felt small, as if everything I had done up until that point had been in vain. For weeks, I struggled with this feeling of failure. I tried to find explanations, searching for meaning in the pain. This led me to a place of deeper reflection, where I began to question my own worth. Am I really worth what I am seeking? I thought. This feeling of helplessness was my constant companion during those dark days. And at the same time, anger grew, as if I were about to explode at any moment. But somewhere in the midst of this pain, something began to emerge. A spark, almost imperceptible, of a desire to start over. The anger was, in fact, a sign that there was still something inside me that was not willing to succumb to the pain. I knew I had to find a way to change this situation. But how? How could I look forward when the past was consuming me? In every thought that ran through my mind, there was one constant. I needed to overcome it somehow. And that meant that the pain, no matter how hard it was, had to be the fuel for something bigger. The following days were difficult. I found myself in an emotional turmoil, oscillating between anger and frustration, trying to understand where I had failed. Lucas's betrayal was not just a professional issue, but a mark on my soul. Anger was not something easy to process, but slowly I realized that if I continued to feed this resentment, it would take over me in a way I could not control. I knew I had to do something to change the narrative of my life, to rewrite my story of overcoming. I began to distance myself from the hate. It was not easy. Anger gave me a sense of control, a false illusion of power over what had happened. But I soon realized that it was only dragging me to a place of despair where the future seemed bleak and hopeless. I needed to stop feeling like a victim. I decided that this was not the story I was going to tell about myself. The question was, what was I going to do with it? Pain would no longer be my enemy, but my teacher. I just needed to listen to what it had to teach me. I began to reflect more deeply on the meaning of overcoming. True overcoming does not come from simply forgetting what happened, but from learning from it and moving forward, stronger. In moments of anguish, I reconnected with something that had always been inside me, my faith. I was not referring to something religious, but to a deep belief that no matter how painful the experience was, it could be the key to transformation. I decided then that, instead of regretting it, I would start over with a new purpose. What could I learn from that experience? How could I use it to grow, to become a better, stronger, more resilient person? Forgiveness was another necessary step. Forgiving Lucas was not about him, but about me. Forgiving meant freeing myself from this emotional prison that kept me hostage to anger. I knew that the process would not be immediate. You don't forgive someone overnight, but the decision to move on and find peace with myself was the first step. The truth is that forgiveness was a bridge to the future, something I needed to cross in order to reconnect with my own inner power. And over time, I began to realize that by forgiving, I was giving myself the opportunity to rebuild my life in a more solid and purposeful way. As time passed, something inside me began to change. The pain that had once seemed like an impossible burden to bear began to transform into a quiet strength. The anger and sadness began to dissipate, giving way to something more powerful. The understanding that adversity, no matter how cruel, also brought opportunities. Life had a way of showing us that often the only way to grow was through overcoming seemingly insurmountable challenges. It was at that moment that I began to see something that had previously seemed distant. New opportunities. When you're at rock bottom, things don't seem clear. Your vision is blurred by the pain and grief of loss. However, as I worked on my mind and soul, I began to realize that, instead of dwelling on what I had lost, I could focus on what I could gain from it. I began to think about how the skills I had developed over the years could be used in new projects, in new paths. The loss of my job was, in fact, forcing me to think beyond what I knew, to expand my horizons. I began to explore other possibilities. I thought about becoming an entrepreneur, about using my experience and my learnings to create something that was truly my own. In doing so, I began to understand the value of being the owner of my own story, of not depending on a system that could abandon me at any moment. My experience at work, as traumatic as it was, became a platform for my reinvention. I began to study, to get involved in new projects, and even to connect with people who were on the same journey of change. What once seemed like an end was, in fact, a new beginning disguised as failure. Most importantly, however, I learned so much about myself. The confidence I had lost with Lucas's betrayal returned, but now in a more solid and true way. I was more prepared to face life's challenges head-on, with a clearer vision of what really mattered. The past, with all its shadows, had become a lesson, not a prison. I finally understood that true strength did not come from avoiding problems, but from facing them and learning from them. I knew that the next step would not be easy. Even after finding strength in the lessons that adversity had taught me, the process of change required more than just reflection. It required action. The fear of failure, of repeating the same mistakes, was always lurking, trying to dissuade me from moving forward. But I also knew that if I didn't act, my pain would be in vain. It was time to take control of my life and follow the path of personal growth, with everything it required: courage, patience, and faith. I then decided to invest in myself. I began to study more deeply about leadership, about how to build something from scratch, and about how to connect with other people in a more authentic way. I knew that what had gotten me this far would not be enough to take me further. I needed to reinvent myself, not only as a professional, but as a human being. I had to learn to connect with my own feelings, to understand my weaknesses, and to use them as fuel for transformation. As someone who had already lived so much, I began to realize that the real journey was not about avoiding mistakes, but about learning from each one of them. I signed up for courses, talked to mentors, and sought out inspiring stories of people who had faced their own storms. The journey of self-discovery was intense and transformative. Little by little, I began to realize that I was creating something much bigger than the job I had lost. I was creating a life that was truly mine, with clear purposes and the freedom to follow what made me feel alive. Even when fear was present, I faced it with courage. After all, there is no growth without the discomfort of the unknown. Something that completely changed my perspective was realizing that I was not alone. There were so many people with similar stories, with challenges and losses that also needed to be overcome. I began to connect with them, to exchange experiences, and to realize that life is a collective journey where mutual support and shared lessons help us move towards something greater. This support network became the foundation on which I rebuilt my confidence and my vision for the future. As my journey of transformation deepened, something incredible happened. I began to look at the situation with a new perspective. Forgiveness, which had previously seemed distant and almost unattainable, became a key to my emotional freedom. I realized that by forgiving Lucas, I was not only freeing him from a burden, I was actually freeing myself from a weight that I had carried for so long. Forgiveness was not for him, but for me. It was the only way to move forward with the lightness that I so desperately needed. But the journey didn't stop there. As I began to understand the true meaning of forgiveness, I realized that gratitude also played a vital role in my healing process. Gratitude seemed like a simple word, but when I began to apply it in my daily life, everything changed. I was grateful for the lesson that adversity had taught me. Grateful for having found the strength within myself to overcome a pain that seemed impossible to bear. Gratitude helped me see the beauty in the little things, to realize that even in the most difficult situations, there is something valuable to be learned. The daily practice of gratitude became essential. Instead of focusing on what I had lost, I began to focus on the things that were still within my reach. I had my health, my family, my friends, and most importantly, my ability to start over. It was at that moment that I realized that true wealth was not in material possessions, but in human relationships and opportunities for personal growth. Life was not punishing me, but guiding me towards a more authentic path, more aligned with my purpose. Forgiveness and gratitude were not just abstract concepts. They were actions that transformed my reality. I felt more at peace with myself, more willing to see the good in people and situations. The pain that had once seemed unbearable had been transformed into wisdom, and this wisdom was now guiding me toward a future full of possibilities. I didn't know exactly where this new path would take me, but I knew that for the first time in a long time, I was walking with confidence. As time went on, my life began to restructure itself in ways I could never have imagined. The pain that had once seemed to consume me now seemed like a distant memory, a shadow of what I had already overcome. I didn't know how, but with each passing day I became stronger, more focused, and more aligned with what really mattered. Through pain and forgiveness, I not only found peace again, but also the clarity to envision a future full of possibilities. That was when I realized that transformation is not a destination, but an ongoing process. Even after so much growth and learning, life continued to challenge me, but now in a different way. I was more prepared to deal with the adversities that arose. The job that I had feared losing, and that initially seemed like the end of everything, now became a springboard for new achievements. Anger and frustration gave way to a renewed sense of purpose. When Lucas betrayed me, I believed that I had lost everything. Today, I see that that experience was just the beginning of a journey of self-discovery and growth. I then decided that I would be the architect of my own destiny. I started working on personal projects, the ones I had always been afraid to try. Creating something new gave me a sense of accomplishment that I never imagined possible. And most importantly, I once again trusted in my ability to create and generate change, both for myself and for others. I began to understand that, although the world can knock us down, it is always possible to get up and bounce back. The secret is to never give up on ourselves, even when it seems like we no longer have the strength to continue. This change in perspective was reflected in all aspects of my life. I began to surround myself with people who pushed me forward, who challenged me to be better and more authentic. My friendships became deeper, more genuine. My family became even more of the foundation on which I built my happiness. I realized that by learning to forgive, I had freed myself from the invisible chains that were preventing me from moving forward. And now, with my vision clearer and my heart lighter, I was ready to face any challenge that arose, with faith, resilience, and gratitude. Sometimes life's greatest lessons come in the most unexpected forms. Who would have thought that being betrayed by someone you trusted most would be the beginning of one of the most transformative journeys of your life? The protagonist of this story not only overcame the pain of loss, but found true strength within himself. He discovered that, in adversity, there is always an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to reconnect with what really matters. Life challenges us all the time, but what will define our future is not the challenges we face, but how we choose to react to them. Forgiveness and gratitude, as we have seen, are not just words. They are the pillars that support our emotional freedom and our ability to move forward, stronger and more aligned with our purpose. What about you? Have you ever experienced something like this? How would you react if you were in the protagonist's shoes? Can you see how deep pain can transform into a force for overcoming and starting over? What did you learn from this story about forgiveness, gratitude, and personal growth? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Remember, life can knock us down, but there is always a way to get back up, stronger and wiser.